Uh, it doesn't take too much expertise, I think, to see in Numbers 11 that there are two relatively distinct things going on in this chapter. There is the people complaining that they don't have any meat to eat, right? Just this damned manna, which I suppose probably gets boring after a while. And to that complaint, we have the solution. God will send quails to feed the people. But God is so annoyed at the complaining that along with the quails, he sends a plague. That's one distinct thing that's happening in this chapter. And alongside that, and seemingly unrelated to it, is Moses' complaint that there's just too many people for him to be able to handle the burden of leading them all by himself. And for that, we have a different solution, which is the appointing of 70 elders to share some of the divine prophetic spirit with Moses. Once we recognize these two plot lines, the people complaining about meat and they're going to get fed some quail, and Moses complaining about not having any help and getting some help, once we have those two basic plot lines in place, everything else in the chapter basically falls into line. We just have to look at every bit and say, which one of the stories does it go to? So I'm not going to go through, not at this point or at any point today, am I going to spend time sort of going nitty gritty through how we do all the separation. You're going to trust me because we've built up trust over our time together. You're going to trust me, and I'm just going to tell you the stories as they existed before they were combined into the text that we have. Here are the two stories in Numbers 11. In the first one, the people weep and complain, right, about not having meat to eat. And they even start to think fondly of their time in Egypt. We remember that we used to eat fish for free in Egypt, and cucumbers and melons. It's a very nice diet. But the people are complaining, right? We're out in the wilderness, and this is the worst. All we have is the stupid manna. And then we get this very brief description of the manna that's not particularly important to our purposes, but it obviously follows on what came before. Moses hears the people weeping, and he and God get angry about what's going on here. Moses, however, is sort of at a loss. What are we going to do? Where am I supposed to get meat to feed all of these people when they whine and say, "Give me meat"? He doesn't have Moses has no solution for this. He can't even think of one. God has a plan. You tell everyone to get ready, right? I hear them whining. I'll give you meat. I'll give you more meat than you could possibly ever eat, right? I'm going to stuff you with meat. And in here is, I think, the key phrase for the story. You have rejected the Lord who is among you with your whining. Right? You're complaining about sustenance, and God is literally in your midst taking care of you. Right? How are you going to complain about something like this? Now, Moses still doesn't quite get it. You're telling me you can provide meat for this many people? This 600,000 people, I'm supposed to, you're going to, even Moses, it seems, doesn't fully trust God's complete power in this sense. And God gets a little annoyed, and rightly so. Is there a limit to God's power? You'll see in a second. So Moses goes and tells the people what God said, and here comes the quail. Right? A wind from the Lord starts up. Here comes the quail. A day's journey on this side. There's a lot of quail there, and they gather it all, and there's a ton of it. But with the quail comes a plague. And with the plague, the naming of the place after what happened there, right? We'll call the place Kivrot Ta'ava, which means literally the graves of the craving. So this is like the story I just told you, a totally fine, a totally fine little story. It's got a beginning, people complain. It's got a middle, dialogue back and forth. It's got an end, everyone learns a lesson and dies. And note the main theme at play in this story. the people and even Moses don't fully trust that God will provide for them in the wilderness. This is a story about divine providence, about the people's mistrust of God's presence and care for them. This story is from the source that we call J. It's the same source. We get similar stories from the same source back in Exodus. In Exodus 15, we have the story of the people not having water to drink. In chapter 17 of Exodus, we again have a problem of there not being water. That's where you get the water from the rock. Same basic language and issues, like, what are we doing out here in the wilderness where we're not provided for? And God gets annoyed and is like, boy, these people, I'll give it to them. And so it's growing here. Divine providence, right? Literally divine provision in the wilderness. Is God in our midst or not? That's Jay's idea of Israel's complaint in the wilderness. The people doubting God's presence and providence. The other story in our chapter, in Numbers 11, goes like this. Just upon, right, they've just left the mountain, just as they're about to enter into the wilderness, Moses is the one who's got the worries. Man, this is a lot of people, right? I'm supposed to care for all of them like I'm their mother, right? I can't with this, right? He would say in sort of modern idiom. I just can't. Okay, so God has a solution. Tell you what, let's get 70 elders and we'll put some of your spirit on them, and they'll help you with this sort of leading the people kind of thing. They'll bear the burden of the people along with you. And this is just what Moses does. He goes out and he tells the people, he gathers 70 elders of the people, he brings them to the tent of meeting, right? And God takes some of the spirit and puts it on the elders. So terrific. And it turns out 2 of the 70 who were supposed to be chosen, I don't know, they got sick. They didn't go to the tent with the others. I don't know why, but they're still, even back in the camp, they're still feeling the spirit of God, which causes some confusion, not least because their names are Eldad and Medad and are probably, people confuse them all the time. There's some confusion about why they have the spirit of God on them, even though they're not out at the tent. But Moses makes it clear, it would be really nice if everyone had the spirit of God on them like I do. Right? That would alleviate my burden. We wouldn't have to worry about anything. Okay, so what's this story about? It's obviously shorter than the other one. What's this story about? It's not about meat. It's not about mistrust in divine provision. Right? This story, well, in part, this story is, I think, an ideological explanation for why there were prophets that existed in the world after Moses. Right? Moses is talking to God, he's leading people all by himself, and yet the people looked around, like in their world that they lived in, they were like, there's prophets all over the place here. Where'd they come from? And this story helps to answer that question. But within the context of the story itself, within the world of the narrative, this story is a comment on Moses's own prophetic leadership and the personal and perhaps social problems that arise when there's only one person who is claiming to be acting according to God's will. They haven't even gone anywhere yet, and Moses is already wary of Israel. And this story, if the last story was from J, this story is from E. I hope that the color coding will help. J is in blue and E is in green. This story is from E, and this is E's main concern: the status of Moses as prophetic leader. And here it begins with Moses being like, oh boy, I'm worried about this. It's like the first stage of what we'll see is a multi-stage process.